All right. Hey, everyone. We're back to the Demand Podcast, and I am thrilled to have not only someone that I've worked with for a while on the show, but also, I would say, certainly a friend now, given how long we've worked together, Deirdre, who is from Superset. And she's right now most recently working at a data AI startup studio, which I think you could probably expand on even better than I could, but has worked with a number of B2B tech SaaS brands and a number of different sizes, but generally in that Series A to Series C space. So really excited to have her on. We're going to be getting into a fun topic of short-termism, brand marketing versus performance marketing, and all the things we love to argue about over and over again. But anyway, welcome to the show again.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be good. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about. So I think to kick it off, because you and I were chatting on LinkedIn and we are going back and forth on message and just talking about something that I think everyone constantly goes back and forth on over and over again about the idea of how much budget we should have allocated into direct response performance marketing, usually defined by things like Google search or Bing ads or incentivized campaigns, things like that, versus campaigns that are more designed for longer term brand building, where we're trying to increase mental availability and make sure that our name and our distinctive assets and the types of problems and situations that we solve for clients comes to mind first, so that when they do have that problem and they come in market, that they think of us. And so that's part of the goal with any type of longer term brand campaign. And these things are not short term, they take time. That's the whole idea with any of these things. So I think we wanted to start there, but you had some interesting thoughts on it as it relates to brand. And maybe we could kind of start there just on what we were talking about on DM a little bit on where you see the divide of why this is such a big issue with marketers and why we get in so many fights with each other over direct response versus brand marketing. You want to maybe kick us off there? We start there?
Yeah, that sounds good. So let's just pan out for a minute and look at sort of the macro view. So
Hmm.
short-termism is sort of like our focal point for today's conversation.
Yep.
Um, so first of all, like when you're in a startup and let's assume it's Series A plus, so you've got some budget, you have a product that's in market, you probably have some early customers, great, thumbs up. Uh,
Hmm.
the desire is let's get pipeline. So usually
Hmm.
it takes the form of where are my inbounds? Let's build pipeline because if we don't have pipeline, we won't have revenue, and that's not good for anybody. So
Hmm.
from a macro perspective, there is this clock ticking, and it's hurry up, let's get there as quickly as we can. And even to the point of where like traditional demand gen practitioners are literally like changing their job titles and putting growth on there because they know that's the name of the game and that's how they'll build their career and find a job, right? Whether you're
I,
in a PLG company or not,
I do
right?
love that. Isn't that how funny how titles just seem to, move and shake? Yeah, it was demand
Yeah.
gen for a while. Now growth is coming back. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be something
What's
else.
du jour? What's cool? And
Exactly.
the reality is, like, the demand gen function is actually a little different to a growth marketer. So, in
Mm.
its purest definition, a demand gen person is really focused on the top of the funnel,
Hmm.
building awareness, driving traffic, educating the market. And then the growth
Hmm.
marketer is typically somebody who's sitting inside a PLG model
Hmm.
company, and they care about all the way through the funnel. They care about like how are we going to get people to engage in our product and then
Hmm.
eventually convert to purchase. But so the macro, the clock's ticking, so that puts pressure on all marketers. The other thing is that it's there's so many channels. Like our buyers and users are on a variety of channels, and those channels are growing and spread out.
Hmm.
So that means you have to be considering like the core channels where you believe your users are consuming content and hanging out.
Hmm.
Where are their communities that they go to find out what's going on in their industry or what's hot? But there's this I think of like a marketer's tentacles is spread into not only many channels outside their organization, but even internally in the organization, they have to consider product, they have to consider sales, and then of
Exactly.
course they have to consider the overarching brand story. So there's pressure on clock and pressure to do more with less. So
And where do
that's
you
the
think where do
macro
you
view.
Yeah, and to interrupt you there, I mean, where do you think the pressure predominantly is coming from? Is it coming from the leader of the marketing team, aka the VP of marketing, or is it coming from other sources, do you think? Where's that pressure originating to drive more short-term results over other?
I think it is macro level. I think VCs are putting young startups under a lot of pressure, like prove it to me. I
Mhm.
think there are, especially with the rise of AI technology, there is a lot of new players in the market, so competition is a lot stiffer. So
Right.
the desire and the impetus is to get out there, go, experiment, move fast. Oh, don't
Mhm.
you have AI tools that make you work more efficiently? Why do you need to actually write content from scratch? Don't you have ChatGPT? So the
Exactly.
pressure is coming from lots of angles, but I think ultimately it's down to the investment level. I will
Yeah.
say that often inside young startups, especially when you're less mature, um, if you don't sit down and figure out what is the model that you're going to build upon, often I've seen where we're going to be PLG any day now, so get ready for that. But for a
Mhm.
while, let's do SLG. And it's
Mhm.
really hard for marketing teams to switch literally mid-quarter and, oh, I'm over here on SLG helping sales get deals and build ops and hopefully close those deals in the quarter. Oh, hang on, we got PLG, we got to drive people into trials. And when you're
Right.
straddling all of those things, guess what? The brand building efforts and programs fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
And
I
that's not good for the long term.
No, it isn't. And you said something interesting earlier. I mean, the clock is ticking, is the way that you put it. And I mean, and you're right. I mean, effectively, there is a clock of runway ticking. And so every SaaS company only has so much runway unless they raise again. And so I know SaaStr had some data across many different SaaS companies that they pulled. And the average, SaaS startup between Series A to Series C has around 12 to 18 months to live until they have to raise again. And so I think there is just the natural pressure of, cool, we want to do some of the long term stuff. We get that. But at the same token, we can't put too much money into that bucket, if you will, because if we do, we run the risk of just purely not meeting some of our shorter term goals that we need to hit because there's a reality that we may not be in business in 12 to
Yeah.
18 months.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really tough. And I think that puts a lot of pressure, to your point, on adding to what you said about VCs, but not only VCs, but also the CEO of the company to say, all right, well, shit, I want to do as much as I can to invest in things that I know are going to help us long term. But if we don't even live in the short term, then it's just that like chicken and egg
It's
thing. I
the
feel like
problem.
sometimes, yeah. So I don't know. Have you seen brands balance that as it relates to brand marketing, performance marketing? I mean, I think there's no perfect answer. I mean, have you seen it's some brands you've worked at or to other tech brands a certain amount of budget that's just allocated and say, hey, this is our performance marketing budget versus our brand budget? Have you seen that distinctly separated, or has it been more murky where it's kind of like, hey, we've got a marketing budget, we're just going to try to do a little mix of both and really not worry about the exact split? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, well, personally, I have always out the gate carved out a piece of the budget to do that storytelling, long-term vision. Who are we in the long game?
Yeah.
And you have to be very careful about what resources and humans on your team you're going to have focus on that, because you can't expect your demand gen or growth team to be doing that and the
Mm,
performance marketing initiatives. So
right.
sort of carve out a piece of the budget. Typically you can work with the CEO and the founder or some members of the exec team to get that story told.
Mm,
um, so separate, make sure you give time for that. It is hard in younger companies to pull in some PR or media relations team to help get the story out there. A
mm,
lot of times, younger teams think, oh, we'll just do some SEO and drive traffic and game over, we're done.
right.
Traffic to your site is great, and that's a necessary top of funnel activity, but that's not necessarily giving you the opportunity to tell the long term vision story.
Yeah.
I've actually watched some recent AI companies that have gotten like some nice funding.
Hmm.
One company I paid attention to recently was Writer, and
Writer. How do you spell that? Writer. Is that B?
Writer,
Oh,
Writer.
oh, writer. Yeah,
Yeah,
writer. Of
and
course, I knew
they
that.
they got some nice funding recently, but they did this amazing CEO sit down fireside chat, Ask Me Anything. And interestingly, she never talked about product. Like she talked a little bit about the investment to get an amazing AI product out the door for future customers and even verticalizing it early on. But she talked about the promise and the vision of AI. So there has to be some time to tell that long-term story. So let's be honest,
Right.
if your customers are going to use your product and then purchase your product, they actually care that you're going to be around for the long haul.
Right.
So it is important. One of the things, I will say one other thing, a lot of young teams don't spend the time on building that solid foundation on who are we, what do we
Mm.
stand for, what are our differences now, or maybe down the road in the future.
Mm.
Um, I heard another really interesting anecdote that I actually heard from Gartner, which is what's your big D and your little d?
Mm.
So your little d is when you're competing with, say, a competitor on product and features, you got to really figure out and make sure everybody knows this is our core difference. This is why our customers buy us and love us.
Mm.
And your big D is for the long term vision, fast forward a year, 2, 3 years out. What are
Mm.
you going to stand for as a business? And that's your
Mm.
big D, your big difference. What's your purpose? So young companies just take the time to write down your long term vision and your purpose and what your core is. And
Mm.
then you will always be able to come back to that. So when the competition gets stiff and new players enter the market, you're not distracted
Mhm.
by, oh, they just brought out a really cool new feature and now we got to go do the same. You come back
Right.
to what your core is and your long-term vision. And that will keep you true and make sure that your brand story is solid and it's not getting jello like as you go.
I think that's a good point. I mean, it's one of those things where I think you could probably say in defense of marketers a little bit here, but commonly I will ask the question like, "What walk me through your marketing strategy?" At least at a high level, like the macro points. And I think it's not a complaint against the way marketers answer this. I think sometimes they're not fully pulled into the strategy, and sometimes they're just thinking about the conversation at hand, which is the channels that we operate on. But many times the question's answered by, to your point about SEO. Well, we're doing SEO, we're doing cold email, we've got some LinkedIn ads going, and we're doing this gifting strategy for ABM. And I'm kind of like, well, all that's great. Those are great channels to distribute your message and get it out there. But I think the stuff that you just said a second ago in terms of your story, your narrative, how you position yourself, the core differences, the market or markets that you're actually going after. I mean, that's the meat of really the foundation that creates all the good stuff that comes out once you actually start to get your message into some of those channels. And I think far too often we're just so tactics and channel focused of like, what's the next offer that we can create to get someone to say yes to?
Yep.
When to your point, if you don't have some of the foundational elements in place from a brand perspective, when you're going to run a more long-term brand campaign, then a lot of that just falls apart. And you're not going to create that type of mental availability. It's more just throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what works, this tactic, that tactic, and it kind of
Mhm.
becomes a little bit more of a growth marketing exercise. Whereas I feel like growth marketing is much more heavy experimentation, A/B testing, all sorts of things,
Yep.
certainly things related to the product as well. So I don't know. Would you agree with that? Is that kind of an accurate kind of summary?
Yeah,
Playing that back?
100%. If you only focus all your efforts and resource and energy on driving demand and creating pipeline, which that's the pressure we're all under,
Yeah.
and you forget about that long-term vision and engaging, you're assuming that when people pay attention to you, that they're actually ready to start using product and diving in and evaluating or trialing.
Mm.
That's they're not there yet. First of all, do they have the time? Maybe they don't need your tool right now. So engage them in a more interesting, useful, valuable way. And that long-term storytelling, like where is this company headed? What are they doing that's interesting and unique? Is it something I need not right now? Maybe not, but I'm going to pay attention to them. And they're putting out some really interesting content. And every marketer, whether you like it or not, has FOMO. And,
Yeah.
because of the rise of a ton of new tooling and especially AI tooling, like Clay is the darling of MarTech right now,
Yeah.
they have to stay on top of that. So be useful and educate them, and don't assume that they're ready to dive in and purchase. So that's one of the huge mistakes that a lot of teams make. And
Mm.
it assumes every marketing dollar that you put in is going to 3 or 5x and become pipeline. Not every marketing
Right.
dollar is going to pay those dividends in that short quarter time frame that people expect.
Right. Do you think there's I mean, I can share one rule that I think has been making its rounds across LinkedIn. I've actually heard about this rule way back when, which is the 97-3 rule. Chet Holmes wrote a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine, Ultimate Sales Machine, I believe it is. And in that rule, he basically asked a crowd of 1,000 people to raise their hand if they were in market for a house today. And the whole purpose of it was purely just to understand how many people are actually in market right now at that one given moment. And about 3% of the people raised their hands. And it was a very crude way to estimate how many people are in market and out of market, but it proved a point. It proved a
Yep.
point that if you were a realtor and you were trying to sell houses, that you would have probably very poor success trying to get that 1,000 people to convert into a homeowner if they
Yep.
hadn't owned a house before. And so that rule then has now been, taken over by the 95-5 rule, which again,
Yep.
it's not an exacting rule for every company. It actually should be theoretically calculated based upon inter-purchase time periods and all sorts of things. But John Dawes for the Ehrenberg Bass Institute came up with it. And I was just curious. I think some of these things seem a little more academic, and I feel like a lot of marketers in practice just don't really use them this way.
Yep.
I mean, Les Binet came up with the 60-40 rule as well years ago based off some interesting data. And so I just wonder, to kind of get into a practicality of, like, to your point earlier, how you separate those budgets. Do you think, you said you allocate a specific percentage? I guess I'm trying to get at is, when you know that not everyone's in market and you got to have the long-term brand play, is there
Yep.
any number or calculation or anything that you would think about if you were advising a tech brand to say, hey, here's how much I think you should put into this? Or do you think it's just not that easy and there's not really any way to box it into at least an estimation of a number? What do you think on that? Are
Yeah.
you familiar with some of those rules?
Oh, yeah, I totally know what you're talking about, whether, the 95% are not in market yet.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
first thing is, back to that solid foundation. Do you all agree who the target account buyer is and who those
Mm,
personas are? You got to narrow that
that's the
down.
point.
I think sometimes people think too broadly. So you still have to get laser focused. And whether you're doing thought leadership, long term awareness, brand building, you still have to make sure that you're showing up for those ideal customers. And they are, there's hopefully lots of them. Right?
Exactly. Well
I
said.
usually carve out somewhere like 10, 15%.
Hmm.
Um, 10, 15% is probably fine. I mean, you have to get creative and clever about how you find, if you're doing some sort of thought leadership or media relations or PR, you do have to go find some interesting consultants or contractors or people who will work with you on a project basis. So you don't
Mm,
have to break the budget in terms of investing a ton of money into that.
yeah.
But I think, 10 to 15% is probably good
Mm,
because it is a long game. I do encourage you to start that early and don't
mm,
wait until, oh shit, we don't have enough money in the budget
yep.
to invest in all that program initiatives. There are other ways to skin the cat, of course. You can invest in doing some social activities. Everybody
Hmm.
in your company should be on social. So
Mm,
carving out even 30 minutes for your C-suite or your, co-founders to spend time socially sharing can actually get in front of your target buyers that aren't yet ready to buy, but will
right.
be educated and brought along for the ride.
Totally. Totally. I wanted to move to one thing that's kind of pseudo related, but I think it's on the same line of thought that we're going down here, which is, you'd mentioned to me, and I think we all get this as marketers all the time, like, why isn't this working? And how do we move this metric, is what you said. And it's a question we always get. We always want to know, all right, cool. We got say $100,000 of pipeline last quarter. We want to get 150. What do we need to do to actually do that? And I think it's not an easy question to answer. It's a great one. I mean, it makes sense. It's very logical, but it's not as easy as one would say, unless, of course, we're talking about just direct response Google Ads or something, and you want to do some linear calculation based off of, all right, well, there's 1,000 more searches. If we were able to get our search impression share up to X, our conversion rates stay at Y, and all our funnel metrics stay the same, then yes, we could theoretically generate another $50,000 of the pipeline, right? You could do some math like that, but it falls apart a little bit once we start talking about longer term things. But what did you mean by that? Did you want to expand on just like your kind of thoughts as a marketing leader when you get that question, maybe, and some of the difficulties of answering that, and how you feel when you get the question like, why isn't this working and what do we do? Like, how do you think about that? What's the first reaction?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. There is the expectation that it will grow and go up and to the right, and there
Mhm.
isn't necessarily that correlation on additional budget or resources.
Mhm.
So early on, make sure you're sitting down with the CFO and the CRO as the marketing leader, and you're looking at the model and you're looking at the historic conversions, and you're agreeing this is what we're, if the expectation is that you're going to drive 50% plus on pipeline, then you agree that these are the investments it takes. So have those honest conversations up front.
Mhm.
The hardest part of marketing is that you have to wait until you see the engagement and the performance, and then you look at those metrics, and then it's already history. By the time you're
Yeah.
staring at your dashboard, it's like, right, this happened. So being really proactive about looking at those leading indicators, if it's directionally starting to go down, then raise those flags early and have those honest conversations, because all too often you're sort of like, wow, we're almost at the end of the quarter and it wasn't going the direction we wanted.
Yeah.
So I actually talked to a former colleague recently, and she shared that she feels like a day trader when it comes to, like, one of the largest investments that she makes is in
Yeah.
paid, and
Mhm.
she's constantly looking at Looker Studio to see,
Yep.
should I shift money from here to here. So you're literally like, on top of all the other things marketing's doing, now you're day trading and figuring out where to invest in what channels that are paying off. And you well know this, Jonathan. There's so many different things that can happen in a quarter. And back to that short-termism, sadly, people are looking at quarters, not halves. As a marketer, I only ever plan for a half, but yes, we're all measuring in quarters.
Yep.
So you're sort of like, start the clock at the beginning of the quarter, agree the initiatives and the programs and where your money is being invested. Then
Mm.
you start tracking. But there's actually some really interesting technology coming out that's going to give you those red flags and alerts and say, this threshold is, looking off, or the threshold that you think is acceptable, or a way to proactively tell you the pipeline that you've driven or created at this juncture isn't going
Mhm.
to be enough to help you
Mm.
meet that revenue goal.
Mm.
So, you have to
Interesting.
surface that data early and often and have those honest conversations with e-staff and including CFO. And
Yeah.
I it's, you can't wait until the end of the quarter and then do some Hail Marys, because it just doesn't work.
Right. Agreed. You said there's some tech coming out specifically to address that, you're saying, or
Yeah,
you're seeing some companies?
some interesting AI. I'm working with Superset, as you mentioned at the top of the call,
Mhm.
and they invest in only AI or data companies. And being able to surface dashboards and insights that are across all your funnel or across all your channels,
Mhm.
and getting some alerts and being able to know, oh yeah, this pipeline number isn't going to be where it needs to be based on the target revenue goals.
Mm.
So in much more proactive and less reactive. Sadly,
Mm.
marketing feels like we've been in a very reactive state,
Mm.
and having that sort of oh shit moment, and then scramble. The hardest part of marketing is like getting things stood up, executing. You know how it is. You're ready to go on a campaign. Hang on, do we have a landing page? Do we have assets? Do we have copy? Do we have creative? All the moving parts, you have to put effort and investment, and you can't expect that to pay dividends until it's in market and stood up and active. So,
Right.
giving team the time to get those off the ground is critical. And then you can start performing and hopefully measuring. Being more proactive
Yeah.
is the next.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you said about the that AI based company, and I'm sure there'll be many more that are doing things like that. But I mean, yeah, to your point about being a big investment to get campaigns off the ground, I mean, I think that's going to change dramatically. We've already started investing a ton of money of our own into doing all sorts of things from a prompt engineering perspective. They're way past what you'd ever do with just like typing in stuff in Chat GPT to do
Mhm.
all sorts of crazy stuff. They could dynamically create all sorts of assets and copy, at least as a starting point, where you've got literally most of the plan organized and even some ideas on what you would do in terms of the campaign idea.
Mhm.
And then you can take that and then decide, hey, what are the bad stuff from that output and what are some of the good things that came from that output? And that allows us to move a little bit quicker, be a little more
Exactly.
efficient. And then to your point, maybe we can, test some of those things within that 10 to 15% of budget into a brand campaign. But I guess that kind of leads into, that why isn't this working, point one more time, which is, when you have 10 to 15% of the budget in, say, a longer term brand building campaign versus performance marketing, I think there's all sorts of things like brand lift studies, incrementality tests, number of social mentions, all sorts of KPIs in the brand world that we can look at. But
Mhm.
do you find that those are as commonly used in the early stage position, or do you use other metrics or other tools that you're saying, hey, we're going to put this 15% of budget over here, but here's what we're going to measure to know if we're headed the right direction, and how to message that. I'd be curious about any metrics that you've used in the past or that you think they should be using, maybe if you haven't
Yeah.
in the past. That'd be interesting.
Yeah. The one thing I will say about metrics is marketing has so much data now and tons of metrics.
Mm,
I think there's certain metrics that the marketing team should keep a close eye on and watch, but not necessarily share those with the wider
mm,
cross-functional teams because it can get very confusing very quickly. Um, One interesting thing that I think, so less is more, and when it boils down to it, it's like what's pipeline, right?
sure.
uh, Educating there is a requirement to educate a lot of different internal teams on what's the difference between traffic to our site or impressions and views and followers and engagement versus,
Mm,
oh, this is an off, right?
yep.
Again, it depends on if you're PLG or SLG, and let's be honest, most are hybrid. But
Mm,
there's a scorecard idea. So I like this idea where the top of the funnel, which is driving awareness or getting inbound traffic, um, is the measure of like what is our brand, how is it growing.
mm,
Sometimes you'll hear things anecdotally like the co-founder is on a call with a future investor and they knew us, so our brand is
right.
getting out there. That's
See, I
great.
like I like those things to interrupt you. I mean, I think those are it's not highly scientific. It's not easily put into a spreadsheet per se, but those little qualitative things. There was an interesting story, and I'll let you finish, but interesting story with a brand that we're working with, and we're not really having a lot of direct attributable conversions within LinkedIn as a channel for them. But he showed up to this conference, and he said literally everyone that I met there was like, "Oh yeah, we see you all over LinkedIn." I
I
mean,
love it.
over and over again. And that was enough for him to validate the whole entire investment. And
Yeah.
he said, I think we should actually double down and figure out how we can reach more people. And I think, in a world where you were just looking at last touch attribution in channel from a direct response perspective, it would lead you down a completely different road. And some of
Yeah.
those like more softer qualitative types of insights are really powerful. That's a really interesting
Yeah.
insight.
And actually, you wouldn't often think that your presence on LinkedIn is helping drive awareness. People often think, oh, I have to go speak at that big conference and I have
Right.
to fight tooth and nail to get a speaking slot, or I have to
Right.
pay a PR agency, right?
Yeah.
So the scorecard is like at your top of funnel, is it growing traffic? Is it certain landing pages and visits? It's not always that MQL at the top of the funnel. Sort of lower top, middle funnel, then yes, it can be measured on some MQLs and
Hmm.
some engagements, and then driving pipeline. Often getting complete alignment with your CRO and the sales team on which accounts they care about. So
Hmm.
having some target accounts that you're going after and what's the impact or influence marketing has on those. And then
Mm.
usually sort of mid to bottom funnel, it is about customers and engagement and hopefully some retention or upgrades and upsells. But
Hmm.
knowing what are you scoring and measuring at each stage of that journey is important, and being sort of really tight on what those measures are and communicating them broadly. Because
Right.
everybody understands a funnel. Let's be honest. That's
Yep.
what, every single person, whether you're a product person or an executive or somebody in sales, they all understand funnels. So speak to
They
that
do.
and have the scorecard accordingly.
It's so interesting. So traffic, kind of the TLDR, traffic would be one of like the uppermost leading indicators of if I've got 10 to 15% of my budget in a longer term campaign, my goal is really to see just incremental traffic gain
Yep.
from maybe not that, maybe that campaign directly, but also to just in general. Is that
Yeah,
the
I've
bottom line?
seen I've seen traffic. The tactic to drive traffic under the covers can be different. I've even
Yeah,
seen it. We put out a press release, we got more traffic. We
sure.
announced a partnership, we got more traffic. We launched a new feature and we put a whole campaign behind that. So a lot of different
Mm.
things can drive the traffic. Now the marketer can dig in and see what asset, what channel, what source, what most recent lead source detail, all the stuff we know and love. But
Mm.
just talking to that awareness and building traffic. Now, of course, the CRO is like, I want the contact us, I want the trial, I want talk to me now. That's fine. And if you get more traffic, then hopefully that will convert downstream.
I think, yeah, that's what I want to get back to because you said it. And I think it's an important one because to your point, there are a lot of metrics in marketing. Frankly, too many
Yeah.
to even report or measure on because there's just not enough bandwidth to even measure all this stuff on a consistent basis and to have enough actions to actually do anything with the data in some cases. So you really have to narrow things down to your point to some type of a narrower scorecard where then you can drill maybe beneath the data and ask other questions. Hey, CPL is down by 32%. Why would that be? Why are some things happening there? The dashboard's not going to tell you. So you'll
Yep.
have to dig a little bit deeper. So you'll have to ask other questions of the data to try to figure out why that might be. If
Yep.
there's anything that you can deduce, and there might not be anything that's directly say like, yep, black and white, it's that reason. But you
Yep.
mentioned sharing only certain metrics with the team and then some metrics not to even share at all. Are there any metrics that you just completely stay away from to say a CEO or CRO personality and just say, hey, this is not even something I'm going to make part of my regular presentation? They don't care. They don't want to know about it. They always push me off and say, that's great, Deirdre, but uh, all I really care about is XYZ. What would you say those metrics are to stay away from? Any come to mind?
I mean, some of the what we have come to know as vanity metrics, so like opens and click throughs,
Yeah. Yeah.
or impressions. Um, some of those are a little bit more vanity. If there's more skin in the game and there's more follow through or touch, then that's more interesting. I will say the hardest part of marketing is attribution.
Mm.
And so I actually wrote a blog on this. Like attribution is really um all that like the CFO or the CRO care about is, well, did it ultimately drive to an awe? So how the attribution happens, ho hum. Just tell
Right.
me like what was the last thing they did and then did the op happen?
Right.
And but marketing cares about it because attribution will inform where to spend dollars in the next Q or half.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So the one thing I would say is like marketing has so much data. I always make sure we keep the data, keep it clean, keep it up to date, surface it among the marketing team and talk
Yep.
about it. Because those are as soon as you get those deep dive questions on one of the metrics, you have to have solid answers under the covers. And if you
Right.
have that data at your fingertips, then great, you can tell a clear story. Just
Totally.
don't surface them every week because you'll confuse the heck out of everyone.
Right, right. I think sometimes, one exercise I found useful at times is the vanity metrics no one really likes to report on, and sometimes it's their bad just to show up to a meeting and saying, "Well, our CTR is up 23%." It's like, okay, who cares, right?
Hmm.
But if you tell the story just a little bit differently and you say, well, the CTR is up 23%, that translated into, 100 more clicks to our website, of which we've now seen an uptick of demos of around 2 to 3, over the last month or whatever it may be, then
Yep.
all of a sudden it kind of sounds interesting.
Yep.
And nothing's going to
Linking
be
them
all,
together.
yeah, it's not always going to be as linear like that, the way I just, said that. But I think in
Yep.
some cases you can, at minimum, draw correlations within the data and say, all right, well, we're seeing that as we invested more here, we're seeing an incremental gain. And if you want to do an official incrementality test, you could do it that way, or other types of things to get a little bit more technical. Although I see very few teams, actually do anything like that on the back end. But
Yep.
I think that's what makes the story then all of a sudden a little bit interesting. But if you just say to face value to your point, say, well, hey, we got 100 more visits this month. It's like,
Right.
okay, well, that's great. But what does that translate into? And how do I connect that to some other business goal that they really care about? Because you're right. At the end of the day, it always comes back to the same stuff. How many
Yep.
high intent hand raisers did we get this month? How many of
Yep.
those converted into pipeline? How many of those converted into revenue? And then
Yep.
how do we get more? Right. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
I will say just one little anecdotal, more personal story. So, the in market, 95.5%. I recently bought myself an EV,
Mm,
and I had been on some websites just cruising, but no form fills or contact us was
yeah.
engaged, right?
Sure.
Um, my friend had it. I got a Hyundai Ionic 5, and my friend
Yeah,
had,
I've heard good things about this. Yeah.
yeah. So she's like, "Oh, it's awesome! I love it." Blah blah blah.
Oh, really? Cool.
My, I have my little car here, my little Cartelligent here.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but Hyundai didn't know I was in market, like, because I didn't do anything digitally to indicate otherwise. So I did like most buyers. They listen to their peers, they ask them questions, they do a little bit of desk research, they check out, and then eventually I went and test drove one. But I was like doing all of my thinking and talking offline before
Right.
I ever actually made a purchase. And for B2B tech, that is often the case. So people
Yeah.
are getting educated, listening, talking to their peers, and then eventually when they're ready, they'll put their hand up.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's one of those things that's just always been there. I think that as digital has proliferated over the last decade or so and more, and you've got theoretically better tracking in quotations I'm making. It makes it feel like we have more control over what's going on. It makes it feel that we can push people through some type of artificial funnel or path, but the reality is all sorts of conversations are happening without you. All sorts of conversations are happening without any control that you can really do anything about. Now, can you influence some of those conversations? Can you make some of those conversations start happening? Sure. You
yeah,
can get active in communities. You can start, posting out various different types of thought leadership, again, in quotations, whatever that is to you, because it's different for everyone.
yeah.
You can pay influencers to work with your brand, which drives word of mouth from their audience to yours and all sorts of things like that. And so it's
Make
not
sure you have a
complete.
really good product that your customers love.
You can have a great product too. I mean, Clay, you mentioned earlier, Clay's a great example that absolutely is the darling right now of maybe broader than LinkedIn, but certainly LinkedIn. I mean, I can't, I don't think I go a day without scrolling the feed without hearing some usually agency contractor, freelancer, consultant talking about how they built a cool Clay workflow.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
uh, and
That was
Clay's
their direct go-to-market wedge. So they
exactly.
went after agencies and contractors
They
they
did.
knew wanted to tinker with the product, and
They
they got them
did.
falling in love first. Yeah.
They did, and they've got an amazing creator program. If anyone hasn't heard of their creator program, maybe we can drop that in the show notes. But a
Yep.
uh, a creator program that not only encourages them, to your point about making that a wedge of their whole entire strategy, but also incentivizing it by saying, "Hey, we're going to promote you. We're going to
Mhm.
help create." They do content collaborations with a lot of these people, and they also promote them via thought leader ads on LinkedIn. I'm sure they do other stuff on other channels, but on LinkedIn specifically, I know that's a big deal for them. And so
Yep.
then it's a win-win. Clay not only gets more awareness on one side from a long-term perspective, but then the actual creator, the person who created the content, the freelancer, consultant, et cetera, is going to get the exhaust benefit of people reaching out to them saying, "Oh my gosh, you know so much about clay. I'd love to work with you."
Yep,
You
exactly.
know,
Yeah,
so
it came just like the car, it came full closed loop, right?
yeah, yeah,
So that means, yeah, your brand has to be solid no matter who you're engaging with, whether it's
right.
a partner, or future customer, or existing customer, because the ecosystem will talk about you whether you like it or not.
I love that. I love that. Well, to kind of put one last question that we should wrap here to keep us all on time. Anything that maybe we haven't covered as it relates to direct response or brand, or anything that just drives you mad or nuts that we didn't get to, that you're like, people have to keep this in mind if there was something to keep in mind related to the differences between performance marketing and brand? Anything that you kind of leave people with, or something maybe we didn't cover?
Yeah, one of the things we talked a little bit about was the outsourcing. When you're young and small and you have
Mm,
a really tight team working closely together and on that whole sort of like drive pipeline, um, don't yeah, keep anywhere it's close to the money, keep that in-house and keep a close eye on it. And Jonathan, you and I have worked together for years. I always stayed involved in all the
mhm,
paid activities. So, we're investing dollars. I got to make sure it's the right investment and it's
mm,
paying dividends. So outsource some of your back office things,
mhm.
or you can augment from other parts of the organization, like I was saying, like get other members of the team involved, whether it's customer success or product or your e-staff.
Right.
So, those tentacles, marketing's tentacles are already super embedded in other functions. Make sure the other functions are helping do some marketing for you,
Right.
because a small team can't do it all. And be very open and communicative about that and what the expectations are upfront.
That's a good point. Yeah, one follow up on that. Yeah, you'd mentioned fragmented, I think was the word. Yeah, that you used. And so sometimes when you outsource certain types of things, whether it be agencies, consultants, freelancers, or just any type of outside help, sometimes things get a little bit fragmented in terms of metrics. What maybe you kind of said it, but what did you mean by that? And how do you avoid it? It sounds like one of the things you're saying is to stay really close with that partner, clearly, and be really involved and not just say, "Hey, good luck, go do whatever the activity you're going to do is, and then report back to me when you've got some results." Anything else that you meant by that when you said fragmented, and where that sometimes becomes a problem? Because I think you're right. There's definitely cases where I know we find that we feel like we're a little bit out on an island at times
Mhm.
when we've got some clients that are less engaged than others, and so then that puts us in a really bad position where we've got to kind of come up with all the ideas, come up with everything
Right.
all on our own, and like that's definitely not the way really any agency relationship should work. You
Yep.
want it always to be a partnership, but anything you'd add to that and what you meant by fragmented?
Yeah, I mean, because marketing has become such a specialized practice,
Mm,
whether you like it or not, you do have to pull in people that know the craft, whether it's paid or SEO. I treat I try my best, hopefully I do better at it,
yeah.
to treat them as an extension of your marketing team. And
Mm,
they should have open, honest conversations with you, warts and all. Like if things aren't going well, you talk together about it and why it's not going well, and hopefully come up with some creative solutions. So treat them as an extension of the team and bring them along for the ride and expose them to as much information as possible, right?
yeah.
Obviously not, proprietary things, but yeah, make sure they're in those conversations at the right time, because
I,
they
I think I think
they
that's the
can
key
be
there.
huge advocates and help you.
Totally, totally. Especially when you, to your point. I mean, marketing teams are small, and it's really hard to get budgets sometimes for in-house resources. So I think
Yep.
if you can find the right partner, invest in them as much as hopefully they're investing in you. Keyword takes two to tango, right? You can't have an agency slack off and not go deep into your company. You got to have both.
Yep.
But yeah, that's great. Well, then cool. We'll call it here. So if anyone's interested in connecting with you, or they want to work with you, connect with you, or anything, where's the best place to find you? LinkedIn or any other
Yeah,
places
LinkedIn
that
is great.
you're active on?
Yeah, LinkedIn, I'm pretty active. You can DM message me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, we got Deirdre on. Thanks so much for jumping on. And we'll have to do this again here in a little bit, see what happens into the new year. But yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, put her LinkedIn in the profile show notes, and we'll go from there. So
Great.
chat here a little later.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, thanks for listening to the Demand Podcast. If you liked this episode, could you do me a huge favor and leave a review? We would really, really appreciate it. This will not only help more B2B marketers learn what's working and what's not, so we all can drive more demand for our businesses. Also, if you happen to be in market and you're looking for a great partner to help manage paid media, build engaging ad creative, or set up proper conversion tracking, go to www.omnilabconsulting.com or find me, Jonathan Bland, on LinkedIn. We'd absolutely love to have a chat with you. Thanks so much. We'll see you in the next episode.